trivia questions. The first one is true or false. Did Mr. Shuda once have to climb out of a window to escape his classroom?
True.
That is correct. It is true.
Who said that? Besides Shuda.
That room had two
Not large.
doors in it also.
The second question is, what is Mr. Shuda's favorite TV show?
Simpsons.
Correct. It is The Simpsons. Third question is, what is Mr. Shuda's favorite Shakespeare play? Fritz. Sorry? Answer. Sure, go ahead.
Is it, I feel like he's 12th night?
Close?
Close.
Romeo and Juliet.
Incorrect. Correct. It is Othello. What is Mr. Shuda's favorite play directed at McQuaid? Okay. Incorrect.
Mousetrap.
Nope. Sorry? Incorrect.
Recency bias.
Drowsy Chaperone.
Incorrect. Fritz? Incorrect.
Language archive.
Nope.
A Philadelphia story.
Nope.
Very good man, Charlie Brown.
Nope.
Little Shop of Horrors.
Nope.
Something rotten.
Nope.
It's epic proportions.
Nope.
In English class.
It's our town.
Correct.
What a student.
Does that even count, sir?
No, yeah, sure. I don't have to.
All right. For our last question, there's two answers. What is Mr. Shuda's nicknames?
Drive-by shooters.
That's one.
XL.
And there's one more.
School shooter.
Nope, it's not a school shooter. Tomas, please leave. Any guesses?
That was my favorite answer.
No one's got a guess?
Sharpshooter.
Correct, Mr. Overall. And that'll wrap up our trivia for Mr. Shuda. Let's give him a round of applause.
All right. Good morning, McQuaid Jesuit, faculty, staff, and students. My name is Ambrose Weidman, and I'm excited to welcome you to Agape Latte 18.0. Yes, and. Agape Latte is a national program that was created at Boston College with the intention of letting people share their amazing faith-based stories with other people in an informal setting. The title for Agape Latte comes from the Greek word for the selfless, sacrificial, unconditional love of God, agape. Our speaker this morning is Mr. Jeff Shuda. Mr. Shuda graduated from Canisius College with a bachelor's in arts and English. He then attended Indiana University for his undergraduate studies and then came to teach at McQuaid, where he's been for the past 26 years. Mr. Shuda helped lay the foundation for Amos and has supported the retreat for over 20 years. He has been involved in the theater department since he arrived at McQuaid. More recently, he's directed the fall play, but he's been a producer for the spring musical for over a decade and moderates the middle school play as well. Mr. Shuda, outside of school, he and his wife own a theater company called Out of Pocket, and he's performed all over Rochester at Jiva, Blackfriars Theater, and Shakespeare in the Park. As Rochesterian, he's a big Bills fan as well. Please join me in offering a warm welcome to Mr. Shuda.
You surely have something better to do with your time, but I'll try not to waste it. I would like to start by expressing my immense gratitude to Dr. Zinda, Mr. Drams, Mrs. Weidman, Mr. Baber, Father Jack, Father Duffy, Mr. Seraphine, Mr. Rogers, and everyone and anyone who is a part of the McQuaid Jesuit Administration or McQuaid Jesuit Mission and Ministry who have played a role in bringing the Agape Latte program to McQuaid and creating an atmosphere where it could flourish so successfully until today. Sorry. I am deeply honored to be standing here where so many other wonderful people have stood. People like Frau, Mr. Brady, Coach Bates, Mr. Baber, Mr. Rosedale, and Mrs. Soprano, to name a few, along with the likes of old friends such as Mr. Verghese and Mrs. Bors, and of course the great Coach Parisi, whose spirit fills this room every time this event is held. I want to begin my talk today, surprise, surprise, with a poem, and I know before you all run for the exits, I can promise it will be a short poem. In fact, one of the shortest poems ever written. It is by the great American poet Howard Nemerov, and it is called Bacon and Eggs. Bacon and Eggs by Howard Nemerov. The chicken contributes, but the pig gives his all. That is a poem about dedication, about commitment, about, to use the parlance of improv comedy, throwing it down. Now, why invoke the language of improv? Well, it's quite simple really. That is from where the title of my talk comes from. Yes and. A pretty innocuous phrase, 2 words, 6 letters, probably something you would mutter while hemming and hawing toward a more significant insight. Yet those 2 words are the founding principle of an entire art form. Okay, let's back up for a second. As Ambrose may have mentioned, I have been acting on either the academic, amateur, and or for professional level for over 30 years. Most of that time has been spent doing scripted work. Here's your script, memorize, 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 and then get out there and do it. But about 15 years ago, I was asked to join what I think, biased though I am, is the best improv troupe in Rochester, Unleashed Improv. And that has been a consistently invigorating, if terrifying, experience. After all, it was one thing to walk on stage knowing what you're going to say, hopefully. It is another thing entirely to have to make the whole thing up on the spot, which is what an improvised performance is. Thank God then for yes and. So, what exactly does yes and mean? Well, the concept is a simple one. Upon entering an improvised scene, the actor in question must accept what has already been established in the scene, that's the yes, and then advance the scene along, that's the and. Allow me to demonstrate, and for this demonstration I've called upon one of my amazing colleagues, Mr. Vernetti. So let us assume that Mr. Vernetti has entered the scene and finds me standing in what appears to be a podium. Not a lot of scenery in improv, but you have to imagine it as such. And he were to say the following to me.
Hey, I see you're prepping for your speech, Mr. Shuda.
No, that's like 2 weeks from now. So that is a bad example. I did not yes and. What does Mr. Vernetti do next? Well, probably he should just walk off stage. Because I have given him nothing. I did not accept the premise, and I did not advance the premise. So let's try that again, if you would.
Hey, I see you're prepping for your speech, Mr. Shuda.
Yeah, it's in about 10 minutes. I've thrown up in this bucket twice. Can you smell it? And the scene continues. Yes and. Big round of applause for Mr. Vernetti. So, even in that very simple and very stupid demonstration, you can see just how vital the concept of yes and is to an improvised performance. Embedded in that concept is the belief that your fellow actor has your back. That if you embrace what this person has offered, in improv we call that a gift. you in turn will be able to take the next step down, what will ultimately become a collaborative path of partnership and faith, and create something remarkable where nothing was before. Which also sounds a lot like the sort of relationship one, myself included, might have with God. That is, after all, why we're here today, to hear a little bit about the role that God has played in my life. A God who for me has been the ultimate improv scene partner, who has presented me with opportunities to say yes time and time again, waiting for me to do so, and then provide the and in advance along the scene that has been and is my life. An example, if you will indulge me. I was born in Buffalo, New York, Chickawaga to be more exact, but my parents moved us, the us being them and my little sister, to the village of Kenmore, another small suburb of Buffalo more north of the city when I was 3 or 4. My childhood was truly an idyllic one, a classic Gen X, pre-social media and cell phone, come home by supper and don't get killed in the meantime kind of affair. I went to Catholic school, K through 8, then a co-ed Franciscan high school, very much like McQuaid, and finally ended up at Canisius College, where I encountered the Jesuits for the first time. From the second I walked onto the Canisius College, or should I say Canisius University campus, I had a plan. I was going to be a college English professor. After all, other than performing on stage, there was nothing I loved more than books. As a kid, I would walk out of the local library every week balancing a tower of books. I was the kid who had to be scolded in math class to put away my book and pay attention to something far less interesting, like logarithms or exponents. See, Mr. Brady, I know those concepts are related, see? If my parents ever lost track of me at the mall, all they had to do was head down to the now long-time defunct Walden books. And there I would be. You get the point. And as such, I can imagine no better life than one dedicated to the study and advancement of literature. So while at Canisius, I made sure to check off all the right boxes, took the classes I needed to take, made the connections I needed to make, and by May of 1994, I had been accepted to the PhD program in English at Indiana University, a top 10 program nationwide. Weird side note, the other PhD program I was accepted to was the U of R's, so I guess I was coming here regardless. I will never forget the day that I walked onto the Indiana University campus, or a sea change from the postage stamp that is Canisius. If you ever get a chance to visit a Big Ten college campus, I highly recommend it. I could not have been happier. I found my people, the professors, my fellow grad students, who could ask for anything more. And then it all went wrong. The school had always been my happy place, and I have the wedgie burns and the dateless Friday nights to prove it. How is it possible then, having reached my promised land, that I could be so unhappy? And why? After all, everything seemed to be going my way. I was making new friends, sitting at the feet of brilliant scholars, doing well in my classes. Heck, at the end of the first year, I made the cut for year 2 and was offered a teaching assistantship. And yet, beneath it all, a deep well of unhappiness was beginning to open. I had hoped that the summer away would clear the cobwebs. When I returned for year 2 of the program, it all got worse. It got harder and harder to motivate myself to do the work, or even some days get out of bed. Forget about the weekends. Entire Saturdays and Sundays will go by without me going anywhere other than the campus library and back again. While my grades never suffered, my friendships sure did, and my future career prospects. I started to cut myself off from both new friends and old. In fact, the only bright spot of my days was the English 101 classes that I was teaching. Without those 50-minute bursts of positivity a couple times a week, I'm not sure at all what I would have done. Eventually, after much prayer and reflection, and a healthy number of Long Island iced teas at the watering hole down the street, I must admit, I came to understand that this was not just a passing rain cloud, that I was lost. that something needed to change, that I had taken a wrong path, that my scene partner, God, had thrown down his part of the scene, but I had not yet offered up my yes. So rather than continue to block what my scene partner was throwing down, I said yes, and I resigned from graduate school. Now let me paint a picture here. I was 24 years old. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Bloomington, Indiana. I had roughly $500 to my name. I had no job, and I had cut myself off from my only source of income, which was the tiny salary I received from the assistantship. I had absented myself from the lives of all my new friends and wasn't doing a great job communicating with my friends back home. My parents assumed I would be moving back home immediately, but I made it clear that I clean up after the messes I make. I was not coming home with my tail tucked between my legs. They were not pleased. I could state without a doubt that I had never been more alone in my life. The months that followed were dark. Thankfully, I cobbled together some work. I got a job as an office manager during the day. I picked up some copy editing for a textbook company out of Indianapolis that I could work on at night. I sold my car and bought a cheap bike. Bloomington being a small town, and where was I going anyway, other than to work and back? So I wasn't going to starve, and I was going to be able to pay the rent. But this could not be my and. I had said yes, but I had not yet advanced the scene. As the clock ticked and the calendar pages flicked by, I stayed in my little self-imposed bunker, every moment spent trying to find a way out. The plan I had settled on was getting a job in publishing, which of course meant hopefully moving to New York City. I scoured the career page of the websites of dozens of publishing companies, wrote dozens of cover letters, submitted dozens of resumes, even scored one interview, an ill-advised credit card paid for a there and back again dash to New York City. But all to no avail. It was hard not to lose faith, and dark thoughts crept in that at times only my cat helped keep at bay. But I knew my scene, my life, couldn't advance if I did not capitalize on the yet I had uttered. The opportunity to add an and to my yes came in the form of an email exchange with a former professor of mine at Canisius, for whom I had served as a research assistant my senior year. I wrote to him asking about any contacts he might have in the publishing world. He responded that he would most certainly make inquiries, but also wanted to know if I completely closed the door on teaching. He was friends with a Jesuit who knew that the Jesuit high school in Rochester was looking to replace several retiring English teachers, and my professor friend suspected that I would make a good fit. At first I was reticent. Teaching high school felt like a step back, well, I guess I can't do anything else sort of situation. But then I remembered how teaching my one-on-one classes had been the only thing that had gotten me through a year and a half of darkness. And one of the reasons I was so lost was that the deeper I got into the jargon and minutiae of PhD level work, the more disconnected I felt from preaching the gospel of literature to the young people who needed it the most. So I rented a car and drove to Rochester, crashing on an old friend's couch. And even though I lived most of my life in Buffalo, I had never been to Rochester. And I knew nothing about this school other than remembering that my cross-country friends used to run in something called the McQuaid Invitational. I arrived in McQuaid on a hot July morning to be greeted by one Mr. John Finn, the head of the English department at the time, and a person who I would come to learn belonged amongst the rank of legendary McQuaid faculty members. He gave me a tour of the school, much smaller then, no STEM center, no tower, no field house, even no fine arts wing. We chatted as we talked. I was being interviewed covertly. That's a pro tip, gents. And as I strolled past the murals and the lockers and the pictures of past graduates and the portraits of saints peering out of the dark wood-paneled chapel, not a lot of people remember that, I felt the joy well up in me like I had not felt in a long time, like a man wandering in a vast desert who had stumbled upon an oasis at last. I had arrived that day unsure that this was what I wanted, but now I knew that I had come home. I could finally add the and to my yes and begin the next scene in my life. So there's just one example of many. If I had more time, I would tell you the story of how I met my wife and the first 2 dates we had a year apart. I'm a slow-acting poison. Regardless, I can assure you that time and time again, when I find myself stuck, lost, rudderless, drowning with no buoy in sight, make me stop. It is because I have not discerned, there's that Ignatian lingo, that it is my turn to say yes and advance the scene. That I have not recognized the gift that God has presented me with, and they don't always come in sparkling wrapping paper and floofy bows. Once I do, though, a path, sometimes scary, often unexpected, but always what I have needed, opens before me. I wanted to end as I began with another poem, a little longer than the first, but not by much. After all, Emily Dickinson's greatest skill is that of compression, of saying in a dozen lines what it took me 15 minutes to say. This is called We Grow Accustomed to the Dark. We grow accustomed to the dark when light is put away, as when the neighbor holds the lamp to witness her goodbye. A moment we uncertain step for newness of the night, then fit our vision to the dark and meet the road erect. And so of larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain, when not a moon discloses sign, or star come out within. The bravest grope a little and sometimes hit a tree directly in the forehead, but as they learn to see, either the darkness alters or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight, and life steps almost straight. If anything, I hope that what I've offered this morning, meager though it may be, reminds all that even when the light is put away, the path remains. You just have to say yes and. Thank you.
Let's give Mr. Shuda another big round of applause. Thank you all for attending today. We do have some treats for those who are here. You're going to head through Mission and Ministry, through that door there, and go around. Thank you.
King cakes for everybody.
Guys with Agape Latte shirts on, we gotta take a picture with Mr. Shuda. Alright, so come back for a picture, please. Give an Agape Latte shirt on.